Good morning, everyone. My clock indicates that it is 11 o'clock. So I would like to welcome all of you to the 13th annual Marshall Frasier Beef Symposium, brought to you today by the Colorado Livestock Association. Hope everybody enjoyed your hot coffee and cinnamon rolls. If you didn't get one, we'll try to make more next time. A little housekeeping here before we get going. In case you're not able to attend the entire program today, just to let you know that it is being recorded. And for recording quality purposes, we would appreciate it if you would mute your phone or your microphone, and also if you would hide your video. It's not that we're opposed to seeing your face, but it'll probably just make it a better recording experience for everybody as we go down the road. As we go through today, if you have questions, feel free to put them in the chat box, and or at a certain point, I guess, Jessica, we can raise our hands after we say get done with the panel. Also, if you've attended this event in the past, you know that we have had a suggestion box. One of the requirements at that time was that if you didn't turn in a suggestion, you would have to take it back to the line in the lunch line. But obviously, we're not going to be able to do that this year, but we would really appreciate any comments, thoughts, suggestions, how we can make this a better experience all the way around. So I guess Kelly will be collecting any suggestions that you might have. And Jessica, I think you're going to put Kelly's email in the chat box for those who would like to respond. Just give you a little lay of the land here today. First off, here this morning, we're going to hear from a panel, and very shortly, Will Johnson will be introducing them. That will be followed by an opportunity for our sponsors today to tell a little bit about themselves, their products, their company, etc. And then following that and closing out the program for this year will be a weather report, although probably most of us don't need a current weather report. But Brian Bledsoe with 5280 Weather probably will give us a good look as to what he sees into the future. So with all of that, I would like to introduce Will Johnson. Will Johnson resides in Kit Carson, Colorado. He is the Flying Diamond Ranch, and Will currently serves as our producer council chairman, and he will be the moderator for today's panel. So Will, the microphone is yours.
Well, thanks, Bill. Hopefully everybody can hear me. I'll give a second to make sure that is the case.
You're all good.
We just at CLA and the Producer Council want to welcome everybody to the 13th annual Marshall Frasier Symposium. Obviously, this is the first time we're doing it remotely or online, and you know, because of the CLA staff and all the preparation, I think this ought to go well, but we'll find out here in a little bit. And yeah, I just kind of want to first start off by saying that, yeah, with this being our first year doing virtually, you know, it was a little extra lift planning it, and you know, a little bit of uncharted territory. So I'd like to thank Kelsey Pope, Brady Buck, Glenn Benjamin, the staff there at CLA. You know, it's definitely been a group effort of the Producer Council and CLA to kind of get this going. I think we're really excited about the approach we used in we came out with in the format we're going to do today. You know, we had to consider kind of the platform and whatnot, but I think it'll be a great use of everybody's time. It'll be a effective use of this hour and a half, and yeah, I just think this will be true to the legacy of the 13th years of the Marshall Frasier deal, and be a real informative and transfer of information. So with that, I guess we'll kind of get into this. And again, the The topic today is the learning curve of 2020, and we decided to come with a group of three panelists to discuss that topic. And I'm going to ask each of them to introduce themselves. We'll start off with Troy Applehans from Market Specialist with CattleFax. Troy, if you could let us know a little bit more about you.
Thanks, Will. We really appreciate, on behalf of CattleFax, we really appreciate the opportunity to be with all of you today. I think I've been a part of this meeting for the last 4 or 5 years, and it's unfortunate that we can't all get together today, but hopefully better times ahead for us. I did, just as far as my introduction, Jessica, you might show the slide that I sent, and I apologize to everyone that I did not get the spot corn futures, the bottom portion of this, corrected before I sent it to Jessica, so I apologize about that. And obviously 2020 was an odd year, so it may be more appropriate to compare these price differences that we're looking at to 2019. If you look at this, I think from our perspective, we're pretty friendly this entire market, particularly going into the second half of 2021. It's going to be difficult for us to have a higher retail price, obviously, in 2021 than 2020 as we hit all-time highs, and that as well as a composite cutout. But I think probably the 3 more or 4 more appropriate categories in terms of the fed cattle, feeder cattle, calves, and cows, we can see that we've got higher prices across the board going into throughout 2021, and not only through 2021, but for the next several years. I think that's just the point that we are within the cattle cycle, that we should enjoy higher prices, and obviously inflation is a concern, and we can look at higher costs going forward, but hopefully we can offset that plus add some in the amount that the cattle will bring. That's about all I have here for the first introduction, Will, and again, glad to be a part of it. Thanks for being here, everybody.
Great, thanks, Troy. Next, it'll be Ethan Lane. He's the Vice President of Government Affairs with the National Cattlemen's Beef Association, NCBA, out of their Washington, D.C. office. So, Ethan, I'll turn it over to you.
Hi, my name is Ethan Lane. I'm the Vice President of Government Affairs here at NCBA, overseeing operations in our Washington, D.C. office. Previously, I was the Executive Director of the Public Lands Council for approximately 4.5 years. And before coming to Washington almost 11 years ago now, I spent the first part of my career in Arizona working in ranch real estate, regulatory issues, and dealing with the kinds of problems that landowners encounter in dealing with the federal government on large agricultural operations. This has been a challenging last year in the cattle industry, as everyone knows, and COVID-19 has made already difficult conditions even more challenging. As we work towards implementing our 2021 priorities here in Washington, D.C., we hope to put COVID-19 behind us and start working on some of those underlying issues that will help make you more successful in your business. Look forward to talking to everyone soon.
And then finally, we have Doug Stanton. He's the Senior Vice President of Sales and Business Development for Where Food Comes From, a division of IMI Global. So we'll wrap up with you, Doug.
And be able to visit with the group, even though it is virtual. We still appreciate this opportunity to be able to do that and tell you a little bit about the company. Where Food Comes From is the parent company. We have 4 divisions that do verification. We do organic certification. Validus division does poultry, dairy, and pork. And then IMI Global is where the company began, and it handles primarily the beef verification programs that I'm heavily involved with. Sure Harvest manages our technology solutions for our customers and also for the other divisions of the company. And then lastly, Postelcia is a division of our company that works in the seafood arena. And can you go to the next slide, please, Jessica, that I had provided? Oh, thank you. And these are just a few things that describe a little bit about why we do what we do at Where Food Comes From and through our different divisions. This is a survey that results from the meat conference that Miden Marketing shared with us, and it shows that 54% of consumers want meat that comes from farms that are utilizing sustainable agricultural practices, and 50% want to look for their meat that has no added hormones or antibiotics on the label, or they are looking for almost the same amount of cattle. People are looking for all natural product. And then almost 40% of consumers scan the package in the meat counter and look for certifications before they buy. And so that really sums up of what we do and why we are doing what we're doing, because it is consumer driven. Consumers are looking for it, the type of things that we evaluate in different operations in the meat industry. So with that, I'll be glad to talk to everyone later, and thanks again.
Alrighty, well, thanks for those introductions, guys. And with that, I think we'll kick off this panel. You know, as the producer council, we brought the three of you in together. We think, you know, your guys' distinct expertise and different approaches, professional approaches will lend to a very dynamic discussion of our topic, the learning curve of 2020. And yeah, I just think this will be a pretty exciting, dynamic interaction. Kind of laying the layout for the next 45 minutes. We want to do this panel. We'll have a session of Q&A at the end, but we kind of want to wrap it up by about noon. So to use that time the most effectively, I kind of wanted to go about it in a three-step phase. The first step would be to have each of you kind of summarize the year of 2020 from your professional perspective, and you know, brief summarization of what happened, highlight interesting things and impactful things. Second, we'll kind of evolve into where does that leave us right now? What's the current situation, the environment us as ag producers are operating within? Then the third phase would be to take the recap of the 2020, combine it with our current situation, and give producers, you know, something they can proactively take back and apply in 2021 to better navigate the environment and the industry's current situation. So first, we'll recap 2020, get a lay of the land right now, and then wrap up with a plan to go down in 2021. So yes, I guess we'll just jump right into that. I'll open that up, and maybe Troy, you can start out this first section, but yeah, summarize 2020 for us from a market standpoint or your perspective.
Well, it's certainly not a year that any of us want to go through again, but I think first and foremost, what we've learned is that these black swan events are becoming much more commonplace. We can never be prepared enough, obviously. And as individuals, I think we learned that we can get by with much less than we're used to. And maybe this is a wake-up call to simplify our lives and focus on what really matters. I would summarize some of the key points of 2020 was that it was the most volatile and for many the most challenging year in the U.S. Animal protein production history. And the pandemic drove a historic shift to eating at home. As we know, temporarily closed nearly half of U.S. red meat capacity in the spring and lifted retail meat prices to record highs. And in the spring of 2020, U.S. food consumption reverted to a level of at-home food consumption that hasn't been seen since the early 1980s. And with that, the greatest and most rapid shift in meat and food supplies in the industry has ever seen. And so that's the way I would summarize it at this point. It was a difficult one, and these black swan events. So we've had 2 of them in the past 2 years. We had the plant fire in 2019, and obviously the pandemic in 2020. And it wasn't anything that was fun for any of us, but I think we weathered the storm pretty well too.
Ethan, if I could ask you to kind of recap it from a government policy standpoint.
You bet, Will. I appreciate it. I think Troy framed that up really nicely. I mean, there aren't enough superlatives to apply to 2020. It was just an unprecedented year, and the challenges we had to face came at us so quickly as we started to see COVID-19 really develop about a year ago now. It really came down to a lot of advanced planning on behalf of not just NCBA, but everyone throughout the industry to really chart out where we thought those multiple threats were going to come from in order to communicate effectively with the federal government exactly what would be needed to weather this storm. And what it ended up sort of serving as, I think, in a lot of ways, is the ultimate stress test of our supply chain in our industry. We've been able to really look under the hood over the last year at every different facet of our cattle and beef supply chain, whether that's transportation, whether that's inspection, whether that's processing capacity, cattle markets, price discovery. We've really been in the weeds on every different piece of that out of necessity in the last 12 months. And obviously that's still continuing today as we get a new administration up to speed on just what it's taken to weather this storm and keep those grocery store shelves full over the last year, and what we're going to need to continue to plug ahead here in the next few months, coming into sort of hopefully the final phases of this as we start to get plant workers vaccinated and farm workers vaccinated and get some headroom here to start back to sort of a normal operating posture moving forward. But it really has been an all hands on deck exercise, I think, in the cattle industry to fare as well as we have. And it does give us some sort of lessons moving forward on where we need to tighten some screws and where we need to sort of update some of our processes to make sure that when the next issue like this, when the next black swan event comes, because it's not a win or an if, but a when, how are we going to make sure that we weather it even better than we did this time? How are we going to make sure we don't have the massive market shocks and impacts that we experienced in the spring? And what do we do next time better than we did this time? But all in all, I would agree with Troy. It could have been worse than it was. I think that's only because of the work of everyone throughout the industry to respond in the way that we did, that we were able to weather it perhaps better than some of the other proteins and certainly a lot better than some other industries out there.
What were you kind of seeing, Doug, from your perspective in 2020?
If we look at our customer base and what we do in our business, we saw depressed prices, the shock with the backup of livestock, especially on the pork and the beef side of things, with plants shutting down, cutting back hours. We saw the supply chains backing up, which definitely affected the prices. We saw that, if you look at the poultry industry and the egg industry, it's kind of interesting that we have 2 facets there. It's shell and liquid, and the liquid, because of what was happening in the industry with food service and schools shut down, they had excessive product, where on the shell eggs, they needed more in the stores to keep the stores full and the shelves for the consumer. But I think a big part of what we saw is the consumer learned that maybe, not to tag on to our company name, but I think they learned where food comes from. They didn't, before you've heard comments where we don't need the farmer, we don't need the rancher, we get our food from Costco. So I think they found out, the consumer, from what happened, that it actually is the ag industry that keeps those shelves full, that keeps the product where they want it, when they want it. And the industry responded. I think the ag industry responded very well and to the pandemic and was robust as far as adjusting to help each other out, make the changes where we needed to make them, and then keep food on the shelves, where in some other countries that wouldn't have happened. So I think that kind of summarizes a little bit from our perspective what we saw. But, you know, our customers continue to do what they did in our verification programs. They continue to see the premiums in the marketplace. And so they, in some cases, it was even wider spread over non-conventional cattle than they had seen in the past. So that's kind of what we saw, Will.
No, I think in any crisis, it's always interesting after the dust settles, and maybe it's settled, maybe it hasn't, but to review it, you know, what were some lessons? What was fast reaction to information? Did that behoove producers? Was it, you know, patience, or, you know, going through it, looking back now, what lessons were learned on dealing with crisis, and yeah, where was mistakes made, where were mistakes made, and where were successes had in those turbulent, uncertain times? I'll open that up to whoever wants to jump on that.
So, you know, from the policy side, I think one of the biggest lessons we learned and kind of field tested is the need to get your plan in place up front, and get all of our stakeholders, every different part of the supply chain, on the same page, and then really stick to that plan and keep blocking and tackling and executing moving forward. One of the things that we saw during COVID-19, and it has calmed down a bit, but certainly, you know, during the summer and into the spring last year, was, you know, there was a different story every day. There was a different panic every day, and there was a real feeling out in the country of the need to chase every new wrinkle in the COVID-19 pandemic, and trying to sort of avoid as much of that as possible and keep the focus on those issues that were really at the core of response, really paid dividends, I think, for us as an industry throughout this crisis. There was a lot of opportunities to kind of take an off-ramp from the main highway, so to speak, on a rabbit trail to the left or to the right, based on, you know, whatever was being covered in the New York Times or wherever else on that particular day, and trying to avoid that wherever possible was really key. Keeping policymakers on task, keeping the issues that are really critical to keeping the supply chain moving at the top of their inbox, getting in front of them repeatedly. One of the first things I was taught when I started working in government and politics in DC was, if you're going to get a message across, you got to tell people what you're going to tell them. You got to tell them, and then you got to tell them what you told them. And we used that to the point of exhaustion over the last year, but it was really critical in making sure that we got what we needed out of federal regulators, out of Congress. You know, we asked for some things we've never asked for before. Going to Congress and asking for direct financial assistance isn't something the cattle industry's really ever done before. I think for a lot of us, we hope we don't find ourselves back in that position just because of the political capital that it costs to ask for that kind of support. But we ended up playing that game better than anybody else in agriculture. We secured more of the CFAP funding from Congress than any other segment of American agriculture. And that wasn't an accident. That was a sustained effort on our part to make sure that we kept plugging away, kept looking for those holes. We spent most of last year reminding Congress and USDA that they missed a bunch of producers with the April 15th cutoff date at the beginning of CFAP. So, you know, trying to make sure that we kept our eye on the prize there really is one of the biggest lessons we took away. Slow and steady really does win the race in a lot of these types of ongoing situations.
Fantastic. Yeah, maybe in interest of time, we'll kind of switch to developing an understanding of where we find ourselves as an industry, as producers, currently in the February of 2021, with all the events that happened, elections, COVID, markets, all that coming to here. So maybe we'll stick with you, Ethan, this time, and you can kind of start off and yeah, communicate kind of a recap of where we are right now, or where the industry lies, I suppose.
Well, you know, we have a lot of new opportunities ahead of us with this new administration. I was on the phone along with our lead lobbyist here in DC and the new USDA leadership team last night,
We've had an ongoing dialogue with them. We've had an ongoing dialogue with the new team at the White House and all of the new folks in committee leadership on Capitol Hill over the last month or two. And, you know, we do have kind of an opportunity here to hit the reset button and begin a new 4-year sprint with a new administration and a new Congress. And it's a really kind of interesting time to do it because of some of these lessons we've learned from COVID. We fully expect to continue having some of these cattle market and price discovery conversations coming into the new year. You know, we're not hearing as much about that out in the country as we were 6 months ago. You know, but the underlying issues are still really in the minds of members of Congress and senators throughout cattle country. To some extent, it speaks to the fact that, you know, there are times in our history where we feel like we're not breaking through in Congress because there are so many different competing interests. But boy, the cattle industry has managed to capture the attention of a lot of members on Capitol Hill and keep it for the better part of a year now. And I can tell you that's as strong today as it's been at any time in recent memory. So that provides us a lot of opportunity to get our message across, to educate lawmakers. We're going to spend a lot of time talking about climate over the next couple of years. That's a topic that generally everybody in Washington right now in leadership is beginning and ending every conversation with. That's an opportunity for our industry to really shine, particularly the U.S. supply chain. That's not necessarily well understood, but we're making progress every day. There was a positive story in the New York Times this morning about some of the grazing practices that are leading us to have such a low environmental footprint. Getting that message across and the difference in tone and tenor in Washington as it relates to agriculture with some leaders of the Democratic Party is light years from where we were even 4 years at the end of the Obama administration ago. The interest in agriculture as part of a solution rather than part of the regulated community is tremendously different than it was. But we're going to have to work to make sure we solve some of the underlying issues in our own backyard as well. You know, what we learned from COVID and what we've learned over the last year is that, and I mean, I don't think anybody was unaware of this, but it certainly was highlighted that we make money in this industry a lot of different ways, depending on regionality, depending on where you are in the supply chain. And, you know, we have the burden to make sure that we're not disenfranchising one piece of the industry or one way of making money at the expense of another when we try to solve some of these problems. And it's going to require us to keep having some of these uncomfortable conversations. It's going to require us to keep challenging each other to make sure that we're getting some common ground that we can communicate to Congress and take advantage of this voice that we have and not have it end up being sort of noise going back to the Hill. Because if we do that, they'll move on to someone with a more concise and clear message. That's been our real success story over the last year, is speaking with one voice and doing it concisely. And we're going to need to really work to maintain that moving into the next year or two. But I think there are a lot of opportunities there to solve some of these issues and really move the industry forward. So that's something we're excited for.
No, Doug, it certainly seemed like a lot of those premium programs were pretty strong in the second half of last year. What are you kind of seeing for markets in 2021 and what consumers are looking for and paying for, being at feed yards or even down into the individual consumers?
Sure. I think that we definitely saw, you know, we track it pretty well through the video sales and that we see. And in the big summer sales last year, the premiums were, you know, wider than they had been. And that continues, Will, at this point of what we've seen in 21 so far. Those premium programs continue to show some more advantage than they had in the past, and that continues to carry forward. I think what from the producer side of things, I think they should continue to focus on what the consumer is wanting. And as I showed in my first slides, that, you know, around 50% of the consumers are looking for value added. They're looking for claims. They're looking for things on the package. And so I think we need to, you know, if you want to get down that avenue and look at that, that's where the producers need to be involved in programs in order to and participate with companies, packers that are doing those programs in order to get that premium. But if they don't, you know, on the other side of the equation, if they don't want to participate in those value added programs, and if they want to maximize efficiency, I think they should at least look at making sure that they're utilizing the technology that's out there, as far as the implanting programs, ionophores, those kind of things, because you need to go one route or the other. Kind of sitting on the fence in the middle, really doesn't generate a benefit either way. And so, we obviously, what we do every day, we think the program, is the route to go in value-added markets. But we know that there's also a commodity market out there, and we just, would convey to producers, maximize whatever direction you're going and focus on what the consumer is wanting. One of the things that I think is unique this year, Will, that we've saw since the COVID starting is this direct to consumer market. We have more, producers calling us up about looking at doing their own, having their own website, selling their own beef. If you go look at a local packing plant today and try to go get your own beef killed, Will, in most cases they're backed up 6 months to a year. You can't buy a freezer anywhere anymore. Everyone's stocking up or looking at what they're wanting to do. And so, the other thing that's cropping up are these small regional plants, packing plants on the beef side, the 500 head a day kind of thing. There's actually 3 of those right now that are in process in Missouri, Idaho, and Wisconsin. They might also, provide. They're going to have to function in the niche markets. They can't compete with the big plants on efficiency, but they can in the niche markets. And so producers can, maybe participate with some of these regional markets through these guys in the niche markets they're in with.
Then jumping back to you, Troy, I think corn prices are certainly a coffee shop talk anytime right around now. What's kind of the markets looking like right now, and what do people see coming down the pike?
Well, these stocks to use levels are really tight on both corn and soybeans, and we're going through a weather pattern here that I'm sure Brian will explain later today that doesn't look too promising. And we've got less than 11% stocks to use ratio in corn right now, and between 2 and 3% in beans. That's something that we haven't had to deal with. These higher grain prices or higher input prices necessarily over the past 4 or 5 years. It definitely impacts cattle prices. Typically, when you have high corn, you will start to build in some premiums, as we're seeing in the live cattle futures, because you have to attract the supply to the feed yard. But you have to offset that in order to get your calf and feeder cattle prices high enough as well. And so we've looked at some regression models, and regression models aren't perfect, obviously, but if there's something that I could kind of relate to those that are in attendance today, it's for every $1 change in live cattle futures impacts feeder cattle about $1.70, and that's with constant corn price, okay? But for every 10-cent change in corn, it impacts feeder cattle prices about 67.5 cents, and that's with a constant live cattle price. But for feeder cattle to remain constant for every 25-cent increase in corn, live cattle need to move about $1 higher. It's something that I don't think we're going to get solved within the next crop year. There's varying degrees of outlooks in terms of how many corn acres are going to get planted and how many bean acres are going to get planted. But there's obviously a big demand, not only globally, but we're exporting a heck of a lot of grain product right now. And I think these higher grain prices are probably here to stay with us for the next 2-3 years. They really are.
I guess on that note, we'll kind of jump into the third leg of this discussion, and that is, how can we communicate to the participants today some kind of proactive things, some opportunities you guys see, and things that we can take home today and really start implementing or acting upon and go from there. So maybe this time we'll start with Doug, I guess, and what were some advice you would have to better equip your operation in 2021?
Sure. I think I'll just kind of continue a little bit about where I left off earlier, because it kind of ties in to where they are now, what we're seeing now, and where we see the future. I think we're still kind of going down the same road. That's the direction we see. That look for what's the opportunities that are out there, and pay attention to the consumer changes that we see in the marketplace, and be proactive in looking for those value-added markets. As I mentioned earlier, with these regional packers coming on, and I'm sure we're going to see more. Just be more conscious of your environment and what's around you, in the programs that are there, that you might be able to participate in. We've looked at our programs. One particular program is our sustainability program called Beef Care, and that particular program is not directed only on natural and cattle that aren't given implants, as some of our other programs are. It also focuses on sustainability, and does not require the cattle to be. They can be implanted. They can be using ionophores and those kind of things. So that's just an example of a program that we are offering, but there are others out there. And I think sustainability is a hot topic, and we hear that a lot. And just as Ethan was mentioning on the grazing initiative that he saw in the New York Times, and what we need to convey to DC, our programs and other sustainability programs that are out there are also focusing on that. And so I think it's just, call us, call others, talk to your CLA and others within your states, and see what programs are out there. Be conscious of what it is, and then go that direction. As I mentioned earlier, keep focused and keep diversified on what you're doing.
Then Ethan, I think everybody with the new administration and a pretty big political deviation from the previous administration, and as you alluded to, all the government programs that were in effect in 2020, what do producers, what can they expect from coming from DC in form of programs and form of policy and stuff of that matter?
That's a great question, Will. We will find out over the next couple of years which version of the Democratic Party is really sort of in charge. They have had their own battles, just like we've seen in the Republican Party, between the flank of their party that's really pushing for radical change, aggressive change, and a shift in some of these agencies, versus some of the more institutional minds that really want to stay the course and build out some more support for their various positions in voting blocks that they're not very popular with. And in the Democratic Party, one of their big blind spots is rural America and agriculture. So, we're going to really see in how they engage with the cattle industry and agriculture in general, I think, a difference between us and, say, the oil and gas industry or other communities that are often the subject of a lot of regulation. And that is going to be a big shift from previous Democratic administrations. That is going to be a bit of a wedge. For a lot of our producers, for a lot of our landowners that are in both of those businesses, that's also going to present some challenges, but it's going to present some opportunities on the cattle side. Exports to China were up 300% last year. We're already hitting our export cap into the Japanese market. We're negotiating aggressively on a trade deal with the UK. The COVID crisis showed us that when consumers around the country were really needing to stock up, not sure what the future was going to hold, they cleaned out beef on the shelves and left all of the fake meat products behind. So we have a lot to really aggressively lean into as far as our marketplace. Demand is high. Doug mentioned it earlier, the growth in some of these direct-to-consumer models and just the general interest in the uniqueness of what our producers are putting forward around the country presents a lot of opportunity, and we're just going to need to really move quickly to capitalize on that. We're going to need to really push hard, as we have been, on the hook space piece. We're working on 3 or 4 pieces of legislation in Washington that would provide more cash resources and support for smaller packing facilities that are filling some of those niche markets around the country. There are some other states beyond the ones Doug mentioned where I know there are some advanced conversations happening on that front. We're going to need to work really hard on risk management tools for producers. One thing we saw over the last year, those folks that are using the futures market and using risk management tools properly weathered this storm a lot differently than those that aren't. So for our producers in the cow-calf sector and places like that, where they don't maybe have as many tools available, we're going to have to work with CME and others to make sure that we're getting tools online to really help them manage risk across the industry. So we have some areas we know we need to drive. Every conversation we've had so far with the new administration on those fronts has been very positive. Those are things they want to work on as well. Even in the last 48 hours, Bill Gates came out on 60 Minutes on Sunday and said that everyone in rich countries should start eating synthetic beef. And he has just been excoriated online in the days since. And it hasn't just been cattle producers. It's been regular people who are starting to get our message. I've seen our talking points helping people to understand that we're only 3% of greenhouse gas emissions in the United States parroted back from consumers over the last 24 to 48 hours. That's good news. We're getting the message out there. And when somebody can say something as painfully stupid as Bill Gates did on Sunday night and get hammered for it, that means that we're moving in the right direction. So there's a lot of positive things to look forward to. We just need to keep our foot on the gas. We need to keep talking from the same talking points. We need to keep hitting those same notes, and we need to keep driving value from our producers. And if we can do that, I think we're going to weather this and maybe even notch some wins over the next couple of years.
Great. Troy, and I think, your opening slide kind of suggested some of the markets that we might see in 2021, but yeah, maybe expand on that and give us some hopeful opportunities people could take advantage of, or some things to expect as far as the ag markets are going in 2021.
It's all about the cattle cycle, the point that we're at within it right now. Will, it really is. These beef cow numbers peaked in 2019 for this most current cycle. We're down a little over 500,000 head of beef cow numbers here in as USDA reported on January 2021 inventory report. This whole deal's been about leverage within the segments. We have all these different segments, from the cow-calf, the stocker operator, the feeder cattle producers, obviously the feed yards, and then the packing segment. There's plenty of money in the system. As we all know, these packers have been highly, highly profitable. It's how do we get that from them? And the way you get that is by declining supplies. And so you just tend to get more leverage across all of these segments and get a little bigger piece of the pie. So as I mentioned, packers making $400 a head at least on average in 2020. And it looks like they're going to have a pretty good year, at least in the first half of 2021. But I think the second half is where these smaller supplies really start to kind of rear their head. And we as cattle producers, regardless of the segment you're in, tend to get more leverage and get a little bigger piece of that pie from the packer. This should last. These higher prices should last over the next several years. Obviously, is inflation going to offset that? And hopefully not, right? But I think everybody is well aware that the risk of inflation is really, really high compared to what it has been over the past several years. And so we all know this is a really, really tight margin business, regardless of the segment you're in, but it's been really tight for cow-calf producers over the past several years. And I think overall they can look forward to some better times ahead.
Kind of sticking with you, Troy, I think there was kind of the whole packer issue was a big thing in 2020, the bottleneck issue, the discovery of prices and stuff like that. And this also will touch a lot on you, I think, Ethan. What's kind of the status of that? Is that lost momentum? Are there going to be changes? Do there need to be changes? What are we kind of thinking on that?
We're still digging out of the backlog. There's no doubt about that. We've got plenty of supplies, and at least in CattleFax data, we've got plenty of fed cattle supplies at least through April. And that's, when you get uncurrent in cattle marketing, you don't get current overnight. It takes a long time It takes a short time to get uncurrent, and it takes a long time to get current. And that's what we're still kind of going through here, at least through the first third of the year. You know, we need more packing capacity for the current supply, but we've seen what packers have done when we've had excess capacity. They've shut that capacity down pretty promptly when they can't be profitable. Again, there's enough money in the system for everybody. It's just a leverage situation that we're going through. And yeah, if we had 2,500 head more capacity to 5,000 head more capacity right now, we'd be in a lot better leverage position. But you don't see people out there jumping to do that because they know how these cattle cycles work and how tight these margins can be at that packing level. And obviously Ethan can speak more to the price discovery issue probably much better than I can. The mandates, we as a company are probably not for, because we figure that it probably disincentivizes people to chase that price differentiation and higher quality product. And Ethan, you can probably speak to that much better than I can.
Yeah, Troy, I think the conversation in the country has subsided. I mean, we were getting, sort of both barrels of that price discovery argument earlier this year, or excuse me, last year. We're not hearing that as kind of the primary issue anymore. We're continuing to push hard on getting to a sort of stable point with it. Our price discovery work, the triggers framework subgroup that NCBA is working with, has put out this framework. We're in our first quarter right now, and we're seeing those cash numbers increase. We're also learning a lot about sort of where there are some buckets of cash trade that we're not necessarily capturing all of. We're working with AMS to make sure that a lot of the cash trade, negotiated trade that's not getting into those numbers that are reported now, can get into the mix. We're working on the packer participation silo of that as well. We think we're going to find some resolution on that here in the next few weeks. But, it's going to be really important for us, especially as we go in, as Troy said, to the part of the cattle cycle we're moving into now, to keep reminding producers that have really sort of combined and equated price discovery with price determination and an increase in prices, that those are not the same thing. We can get into that area where we're discovering price and we have enough negotiated and cash trade in the marketplace to make sure that we're informing everyone of price, but that is not necessarily going to translate to everybody making more money on their cattle. And I think there's a lot of producers in the country that have sort of latched on to different YouTube commentators or whoever else and taken that to the bank as kind of a silver bullet to solve all of their issues. And that's not it. It's one piece of a much larger puzzle. And if we're going to sustain some elevated levels of negotiated and cash trade, we need to make sure that we're doing it in a way that really pencils for buyers and sellers both. We haven't necessarily, I don't think, cracked that code yet as far as offering some different alternatives that really are going to keep those buyers and sellers coming back week over week. Certainly, we're making up ground. The Fed Cattle Exchange is a great example of that.
Oh, I think we lost you, Ethan. You're muted. I don't know.
It just randomly muted me. I'm not sure why, but I'm back now. Can you hear me?
We're copying. Yep.
All right. Yep. So anyway, there are a lot of those things that I think are going to continue to develop over the next few months as we kind of keep pushing this issue. And we are going to see those bills reintroduced on Capitol Hill. We expect Senator Fisher's price discovery bill, as well as Senator Grassley's, to be on the street probably as early as next week. And that's going to start that conversation all over again. So we will see where that takes us over the summer, but we're working closely with Senator Fisher and her team, as well as others in this conversation. And we're just going to have to keep sort of showing them what we've put together, what we're seeing in the marketplace, and trying to figure out a way through this that makes sense for the industry.
Hey, Will, we have a question in the chat.
Perfect. Yeah, well, with that, I think we're down to about our last 10 minutes, so that will be a great segue. Encourage any participant to type in any questions you have, and we'll push them towards the panelists. But yeah, I see Bill Hamrick, and I'll direct this to Doug maybe, and I think that might be the guy. What do you see happening with it in 2021 with the restaurant industry? Doug, you're muted.
Innovation, I think, is the key for restaurants moving forward. Those that are going to survive. You know, we've seen the numbers that 30 to 40% may not survive and come and be viable in the future, but those that have survived and are doing well, you know, are either doing ready-made, they're doing curbside, drive-through, delivery services. I've seen some numbers where DoorDash is up 110%. So restaurants that are participating in that. I've seen also Grubhub, some numbers on them. They're up over, you know, the same kind of numbers, over 100% over previous, and then the orders are larger. So we're seeing restaurants that are going to survive. Those are the kind of things that are going to have to participate with in order to maintain. And those that have done that and reacted to that are those that are surviving, and in some cases doing very well. So that's the kind of the side that we see. Also, I think that, you know, tying into the niche marketing in some cases and offering what the consumers are looking for. If they're looking for branded products, if they're looking for products with labels, to get that message out through their websites and to the consumer. And those that, you know, if we continue to be in a situation where they can't 100% dine in their capacity, so they have to be innovative in what they're doing, is what we see.
Either of the your other two panelists have any quick thoughts on that restaurant in 2021?
Well, I guess I would say, you know, while 2020 is over and the U.S. protein supplies are back to normal, I mean, the food service sector's lost essentially 1 in 5 restaurants nationally during the pandemic. It could be the back half of 2022 before the food service sales return to pre-pandemic levels as the restaurant industry rebuilds. I mean, that's kind of the way that we would see that.
Ethan, I might put you on the spot. And again, all you participants, if you have any questions, this is your opportunity. So definitely bring them in. I guess, Ethan, I would ask you to maybe comment to the local Colorado government policy, and it's probably not your expertise, but what are you, do you have any thoughts on what's going to happen out here in 2021 specific to Colorado?
You know, I could take that any number of different ways. Colorado is always sort of at least in the last 10 years, sort of a testing ground for, you know, sort of fringy environmental policy. Obviously, you guys are wrestling with reintroduction of the gray wolf, and you know how that's going to be handled at a state level versus the national delisting that we secured in the lower 48 states. Colorado's in a unique spot because that existing federal listing probably would have helped keep a state reintroduction at bay in Colorado. It's probably the only state where that was sort of the inverse of the benefit everywhere else in the country. But, you know, I also believe that in a lot of ways, Colorado is way ahead of the game. And I think this bears out in your Livestock Association, CLA and Colorado Cattlemen both, in your understanding of the different organizations that really can impact how we do our business. You know, you've had to make you know, your way in state government that really has a lot of those voices with a firm seat at the table in ways that other parts of cattle country haven't necessarily had to deal with yet, and maybe are going to have to deal with in the next decade and a half. So, you know, as frustrating as it can be for producers in Colorado, and I know that it can be, I think that it does kind of give you guys a little bit of an edge in the game, because we're all confronting that at a national level now. I was on a call earlier today with every ag organization I can think of in Washington, and most of the environmental organizations, all on the same call talking about some of these climate and sustainability issues. You guys have been having to have those conversations in state for a very long time. So, you know, it kind of paints a picture of what I think the rest of us can expect to see more of, for better or worse in the years to come. But I know it can be frustrating for folks on the ground there in Colorado on a day-to-day basis. You know, after years of being the executive director for the Public Lands Council, I mean, the federal grazing permit side, the explosion of recreation. I mean, there's some challenges there in Colorado that are really ground zero for some of these land use battles, and that's not going away anytime soon. Certainly not in this administration.
I guess sticking with you, Ethan, from Bill Hamrick again, what can the grassroots do to help efforts in DC, and kind of how do the rural voice get amplified and continue to be amplified?
If there's one thing we've learned more than anything else from COVID-19 is our members of Congress will listen if we talk. And we had a lot of producers that were engaged over the last year, more so than in the past. And they were making their voices heard, and that has resonated with members of Congress. It's resonated with federal decision makers across the spectrum. So, I mean, and I've always said this, but it's probably as true now as ever. Keep making your voice heard. Keep showing up to meetings. Keep speaking up in policy conversations. Don't just be angry that your cattle association isn't doing things the way you'd like to see them done. Put your voice on the record. Speak up. Make your opinion known, because there's one thing we see in Washington is there are a lot of different perspectives on this, and they all can help us inform the federal government about what we need to be successful. So I would just encourage everybody to not go back to their operations and assume someone else is doing the hard work here of communicating what this industry needs. We see it in comment periods on the gray wolf. I'll go back to that for an example. We had about 600 comments nationwide from our producers on delisting the gray wolf. The environmental community put about 2 million plus on the record. So, we don't have 2 million cattle producers in this country, but we do have 800,000. So we need to do a better job of not assuming our neighbor's going to do the heavy lifting for us on these issues, make our voices heard, and really stay engaged in these issues, both inside the organizations and politically with your representatives as well.
I think we have time for maybe one or two more questions. And while they're coming up with that, I'd ask you, Troy, to maybe comment specifically on kind of the export markets and kind of what that atmosphere that looks like in 2021 with the dollar and just everything. Yeah, exports from our industry.
Well, much more positive than it was last year. Obviously, last year we had production challenges and weren't able to export as much. China, really good. Last year we exported 119 million pounds of beef to China. When you include Hong Kong in that, that's quite a bit more than that, actually. That 119 million last year compares to 32 million in 2019. And the part that was amazing about those exports to China last year was that 70% of that 119 million pounds occurred in the fourth quarter. And obviously they've had their challenges with the African swine fever. We think these exports are going to be up this year. I mean, of all proteins, essentially. And China's going to play a big step in that, as well as Mexico, Japan, South Korea, all those Asian countries. I don't know. We're probably going to be about even on total exports or net exports between imports and exports of about 3 billion pounds. But it looks positive. And when you combine what those exports are worth, it's over about $340 per head of what those export markets just for beef are worth to us. And so hopefully that emphasizes the importance of export markets. If they were to go away, for instance, you can take $300 plus off a head overnight. And so we need to continue to pursue that. Hopefully the new administration will continue to go through that with our trade partners as well. But it looks favorable. It really does for pork protein as well as poultry. And one of the things that we looked at this year is poultry production or poultry exports this year and production is expected to be down slightly. That's the first time in about 10 years. So that's one of the positives going forward, to where our per capita supplies here domestically of all protein sources will be down about a pound, and that's pretty big.
I think we may have got the final question in. It's from Tess Johnson, who is my my cousin. And the Wall Street Journal has had 3 articles the last couple of weeks on agriculture and diets, and each one was pretty negative on animal production and the environment. And this, I think, Doug, you brought it up, or all you guys have brought it up, how the environment's going to be playing a bigger role. It seems like we're not getting our side of the story out in these outlets. Wall Street Journal, we kind of probably think of as a little closer to us. On our side, are we losing the war? Who wants to jump on that?
I can take a stab at it. I know the articles that she's talking about. And yeah, you expect sometimes the Wall Street Journal to maybe be a little more reflective of our view of the world. But to be honest, in the media environment nationally in 2021, it's kind of all bets are off. Like I said earlier, we had some decent coverage in the New York Times, which we never expect to see anything positive in the New York Times. We're not losing the war. I think that the media landscape is going to continue to be, at least outside of our own arena, the national media landscape and the international landscape, going to be a challenging area for us. We are still in that category where, to Doug's point earlier, a lot of people don't know where their food comes from. So it gives reporters who also don't know where their food comes from really broad latitude to tell our story for us. And when we have the opportunity to comment on those stories or put a surrogate into those stories to tell our story for us, often we're in a rebuttal stance rather than driving the dialogue in those stories. And that's a frustration we see with media across the board. It's not just specific to the cattle industry, but it is something that we're engaged in really aggressively and proactively. We have a team that works on that both in DC and Denver, and we get our share of wins in there, and then we see stories come out that we're not happy with, and we try to engage on the backside and clean those up. But the message that federal officials in the Democratic administration that have just come in are coming back to us with shows that those messages and those bad Wall Street Journal stories aren't getting through to them. They have a better understanding of what we do and how important we are. So for that reason, I don't think that we're necessarily losing the war, but we're sure in the middle of it, if that's maybe a better way to put it.
And Will, I just add on there a little bit for on more of a local basis, maybe with producers, that we feel like they need to tell their story in any fashion they can. And we have a program that we have and videos that our marketing manager, Jennifer Moore, works with, and it's called Storybit. And it's just something, our way of portraying the stories of our producers out there in video format, out in the media, in social media. And I think that's one way, at least from our standpoint, to get the message out to the consumer and be able to tell the positive stories of our producers and getting involved in those type of things like that.
And Will, if I could add one thing to that too, just as kind of a heads up, we get a lot of international reporters and national reporters that show up on producers' operations. They want to come on farm. They want to bring video cameras. You don't have to do that. And if you don't know the reporter, if they're not folks that you're comfortable with, call Bill, call CLA, call us in DC, and we can vet some of these sources for you. But don't give yourself, don't expose yourself to a negative story that's a setup because somebody showed up at the gate and wants to come in and talk to you about what you do. Don't assume people have good intentions when they're writing these stories. A lot of times they're looking for an angle, or they're looking for you to play a really specific role in their story. So don't ever hesitate to reach out to any of us, and we can help you vet that stuff and see if they're legit or not, or worth your time.
Great advice. Great advice. Jessica or Kelly, we have a couple more questions, it looks like, but I think we're pressing up on our time. Should we wrap this up, or what?
I think, Will, that a few of these follow-up questions were around the same topic. So if Brian's okay with it, I think we might just move into the sponsor introductions.
All righty. Well, with that, I'd just like to thank again our panelists for your time and your knowledge on all this. To recap, we had Troy from CattleFax, Ethan from NCBA, and Doug from IMI. So sure, thank you, panelists. And with that, I'll turn it back over to Bill.
Thank you, Will. And I too would like to repeat what you just said. Thank you to our panelists here today. I thought it was a great program and some great insight. And certainly if we can be any assistance here at CLA, please get in touch. As we all know, meetings like this would not be possible without some type of support and sponsorship from our friends in the allied industry. And I guess this afternoon, I would like to call upon those who have sponsored this program today. And I would like to begin with Ag Risk Advisors with Aaron Tattersall.
Thanks, Bill. Hi, everyone. My name is Aaron Tattersall, the owner of Ag Risk Advisors. I started this business 2 years prior to the inaugural Marshall Frasier Beef Symposium, and I'm always contemplative when it comes around. It reminds me of how long I've been doing this and how fast time goes by. Our focus here at Ag Risk Advisors is to provide risk management solutions for the production risk ranchers and farmers face every day. And we're proud to serve our producers in every state west of the Mississippi from our office here in Greenwood Village. Some of the most exciting risk management improvements since I started 15 years ago have really occurred in the past 10 months, particularly to the Livestock Risk Protection or LRP program. I'm going to share one of my screens here, make sure that can be seen. So, these improvements to the LRP program, a big thank you goes out to CLA and to NCBA, who both offered their support for these improvements to the program. One of the primary themes I've heard today so far from the panelists is risk, and LRP is a very affordable and flexible method for folks to lock in price protection for your marketable animals. And so what I'm showing on the screen is a site that we put together, lrpadvisors.com. And it's really just designed as an educational tool for folks to learn and self-serve at their own pace. One of the things I've found, particularly in risk management, is you better learn about these programs before it's too late. And so that's one of the things we're trying to accomplish here with lrpadvisors.com. As I scroll down on this page, we've put together a little commercial about it. It's about 1.5 minutes. I'm going to scroll down a little bit longer. Many of you might be interested in the feeder cattle section of the website. And what you're going to find here is, scroll down a little bit more, a couple of videos. One is questions and answers on LRP. It's about 3 minutes long. And the second one is a way that you can sign up to receive daily livestock risk protection offers to your email that are customized to your operation. And so really proud of this feature. And there's just a quick video there to see how that works. Anytime there's some buttons around this website, it says contact an advisor. If you click on that and then enter your information and the type of cattle or marketable animals you were interested in getting LRP offers for, we'll reach out to you to set that up. So just really, again, really excited about that. We're here for you anytime you have questions. Our contact tab has our phone number and our website. So that's all I've got, and I'll turn it back over to you, Bill. Thank you.
Thank you, Aaron, and thank you, Ag Risk Advisors. I do see Randy Asher with Alltech. Randy, would you like to step to the microphone next?
Yeah, I'll be glad to. Again, Randy Asher with Alltech. Alltech's based out of Lexington, Kentucky. We manufacture all natural feed additives. So for those of you that may not have even heard of Alltech, you've probably heard of Biomoss. Biomoss is the flagship product for the beef industry from Alltech. It's designed to offset the negative effects of gram-negative pathogens that would normally cause scours in adult and in cows and in calves. So for more information on Biomoss, if you want it, I can be reached at rasher@alltech.com, or you can go to the Alltech website or visit your local feed supplier for information on Biomoss. And I just want to say thank you to everybody that was on today. CLA did a wonderful job getting this put together, and we were just proud to be a part of it. And I hope everybody has a good rest of their day.
Thank you, Randy.
You bet.
And sponsorship is greatly appreciated. Next up, how about Weston Charles with Flagler Cooperative? Weston, are you out there?
Yes, sir. Can you hear me, Bill?
Yes, sir.
Good. Good afternoon, CLA. I appreciate you guys jumping on here. I think most of you have probably heard from us in the past. We are a cooperative that handles feed, fuel, grain handling, you name it. We want to serve our members to the best of our abilities. We encourage you guys to reach out, chat with us, and enjoy the co-op model. I guess, if we have success, that goes back to our producers, to our members, and we're proud of that and are excited for our future. Even though it's been a rough road lately, I think the best way to get through it is together. And I always say it, but I do mean it. I appreciate all you producers taking the time to be involved with organizations like CLA, and I think that's awful important and a good step in the right direction for our industry and for our future. I appreciate the time, and gosh darn, I hope to see you in person next year as we'll be back. Thanks, Bill.
Thank you, Weston, and we too hope that we can get together face to face. I do have a quick question for you. How are your customers doing in dealing with this recent cold spat that we had?
I think that it varied all around depending where you're at. If you're in the middle of calving versus if you're still on corn stalks and everywhere in between, we give our grain farmers a hard time that they don't know anything about winter because they don't have anything to do. But, honestly, I guess we're, whether you call it fortunate or unfortunate, we're a little more used to this than a lot of our friends further south. I think at least this one was predicted a little bit, and I haven't talked to anybody that got in too big a wreck. So, and same, and you can stretch that even with COVID and everything else, man. If we could just catch some snow and rain, I think the majority of our producers would be in a lot better shape, and that's their biggest worry right now is truly the drought. But
Well, I think we're going to hear here in just a little bit kind of what the prospects for snow and rain look like as we go forward. I would like to say another sponsor today is our good friends at Elanco. Unfortunately, their folks were tied up in meetings of various kinds, and they are unable to join us here today in person, but I would like to extend CLA's thanks for their sponsorship of the 13th Annual Marshall Frasier Beef Symposium. I'm going to try one more time. Bob Mosier, have you been able to connect? *6.
Bill, can you hear me?
I can now, Bob. Go ahead.
It automatically muted me. Sorry about that. Little challenge with the technology.
We all deal with it, yes.
Well, first of all, on behalf of Tom Herron, the CEO and owner of Ag Professionals, as well as the 25 professionals we have in office, we'd like to thank you for the opportunity to be a sponsor for the Marshall Frasier Beef Symposium. Briefly, I'll just go over some land use issues that would outline some of our services at Ag Professionals. We're involved with land planning. If it has something to do with land, we probably get involved. Permitting, site design. We represent our clients at hearings, zoning and easements, as well as right-of-ways. In the field of agronomy, we have a vast experience with CAFO permits, liner certifications, nutrient management plans, of course, regulatory compliance, record keeping, and some crop recommendations. We have in-house licensed engineering for dairy and feedlot designs, grading permits, and site designs. We have an in-house licensed surveyor. So as far as property transfers, identifying boundaries and topos, site locations, we can take care of you there. In terms of environmental issues, we're an advocate of environmentally friendly practices and sustainability. We also have real estate brokerage. We handle a lot of feedlot, dairy facilities, as well as pork and poultry, relocation, farms and ranches, as well as site selection. I would like to remind everybody that our website at www.agpros, that's agpros.com. We'll go over these services, our contacts, a profile of our professionals, as well as real estate properties we have for sale. I'd like to compliment ourselves. The Land Report selected us as one of America's top brokerages of 2020. So we're pretty proud of that. And with that, thank you again, Bill, and I'll turn it back to you.
Thank you, Bob, and tell everyone at AgPro that we really appreciate their support. Thank you. And thank you to all of our sponsors. Your support is greatly appreciated. Next up, our next presenter, and backed by popular demand, is Brian Bledsoe. Brian is with Weather 5280, and he is here this afternoon to give us a little sneak peek at what the weather might look like as we go on into 2021. Brian, I might just suggest, I think we're all aware of how cold it has been, so you don't have to talk much about that, but I hope you got some good news as we go through the months ahead. So
do that. There we go. All right. Well, thanks everybody for having me here today. I've been doing this Marshall Frasier Beef Symposium now for the past several years, and it's always a pleasure to speak with you folks. And whether or not you've ever heard me speak, those of you that have heard me talk before, you know that I'm all about sharing information with you that maybe you haven't seen, or maybe information you haven't seen that can help you better manage your risk as far as your business is concerned. And we've obviously had some challenging times around recently due to moisture, but we're not the only ones. And that's probably one of the biggest things that bothers me about kind of where we sit. So if we look at this first map up here, this is the long-term drought indicator, and it's somewhat tied to the drought monitor that I know a lot of you are familiar with, but it really puts into perspective where we are and where we've been, and not only that, but where we have to go to get out of this thing. And you can see that this drought situation is quite regional. It not only encompasses all of eastern Colorado, it encompasses the western slope. Most of the Four Corner states are in terrible shape right now, and even down into West Texas, we've got some real issues. Now, there are some areas that are obviously faring better than others, especially locally. If we go to the next slide, I'll show you where we've been as far as the past 60 days is concerned in terms of moisture. So if you look at where the brown areas are, that's where we've been drier than average the past 60 days. That's where we're in a deficit on the order of about an inch. The red shaded areas, that puts you in a deficit in terms of about 3 to 4 inches of moisture. Now, the San Juan Mountains and a large part of our mountain areas have struggled over the past 60 days. But if you look at that map, you say, well, it looks to me like northeast Colorado, far northwest Kansas, southwest Nebraska has been seeing some moisture. Absolutely. It's not enough to pull us out of the drought. But you've also had southeast Colorado not faring that well either. And I know the snow that came through for some of us this last weekend, I mean, the moisture content in that was basically nil. I mean, if you stacked up about 5-6 inches of snow, your liquid equivalent to that was about 1/10 of an inch of moisture. It was just absolute dry, powdery fluff. So something like that, I know while we'll take anything, it really doesn't do any appreciable good to pull us out of the drought situation. And when we've got something that's got a hold on us regionally like this, it makes it even tougher. You go east of here, and obviously things get better across Nebraska, Iowa, eastern Kansas, and that's typically the case with the weather pattern that we have currently in place. Let's go to the next slide. This is how our oceans are stacked right now. These are sea surface temperature anomalies. So what you're looking at here globally are ocean temperatures above and below average. Where you're seeing the reds and the oranges, that's where it's above average. The blues and the greens below average, the white somewhat near average. And you can see across the central Pacific Ocean, there's a lot of blue and green right there. And that's indicative of the La Nina episode that we're dealing with. If you joined me last year at this same event, we were talking about this same type of setup where we were likely going to see some sort of a La Nina episode. And I spread that out across a large part of my clients last year. So we had about a year notice, at least 10 months notice that this was going to happen. And the forecast is kind of verified pretty well accordingly. Now, I will say that a lot of times during a La Nina episode, most of the Pacific Ocean will end up colder than average. Well, we still have a good deal of warmer than average water in the North Pacific. That has made this La Nina behave a little bit differently than some others. But in general, the overall pattern has acted to perpetuate drought for the areas that have had drought and that will likely continue to see drought, at least in the foreseeable future. So let's go to the next slide, and we'll kind of take a little better look at the La Nina episode and how it stacks up in terms of the past couple of months or so. So this animation starts in late November and finishes up here just a couple of days ago. And you can see all that blue that extends across the Pacific Ocean and the changes associated with it. That's at the surface, mind you. So that shows you the ocean temperatures have been cool at the surface now for a while. If we look beneath the surface with this next animation, we're basically going from the top down across the Pacific Ocean from west to east. So over on the left-hand side, you're over near Australia. Over on the right-hand side, you're off the west coast of South America. And you can see the ocean temperatures there are colder than average, down to about 200 meters. And it's not going away. So when you have a situation that's stacked like that, it makes it very difficult to change the overall setup. Now, if that cold water was shallower in depth, and we had a bunch of warmer than average water building up beneath it, I'd be like, well, this La Nina episode is not only peaked, but it's probably going to be coming to a rapid end. I don't see that happening just yet, being that the colder than average water still has a pretty significant depth to it, down to about 150 meters. So until we see that change, it's kind of a what you see is what you get as far as the ocean temperatures go. In terms of computer model forecasting, which we can look with the next slide, it'll show you all these different computer models that are forecasting whether or not we're going to see an El Nino or a La Nina episode or neutral conditions. And virtually all of those models, at least the average of them, pull us out of this La Nina episode later this spring and into the early part of the summer. And that's usually the case. Whenever we see some sort of an El Nino or La Nina episode change, it usually takes place during the spring with the seasonal shift that goes on. However, there are still quite a few of those models that keep us down there slightly cooler than average, even through the remainder of 2021. So it gives me a little bit of pause to just simply say this La Nina is going to go away. It may have peaked in strength. That doesn't necessarily mean that it's going to go away. And that's just a trend that I'm going to have to babysit over the next several weeks and obviously into the coming months. But I don't see a rapid flip by any stretch of the imagination going to back to neutral or to flipping it over to El Nino type conditions, which begs the question, what our long-term patterns are. And I put this together, this next couple of maps together to show you kind of how the Pacific and the Atlantic Ocean have behaved all the way back since 1860, if you will. So let's go to the next slide. This first one is the PDO, the Pacific Decadal Oscillation. And if you go all the way back to 1860, you can see how the Pacific Ocean has behaved with the warm and cool phases that it's been under. So where you're seeing those red spikes, that's where the ocean has generally been in a PDO positive or a warm phase. Where it's the blue spikes, that's where it's been negative. And it's very linear that when the PDO is in a negative phase, we will usually struggle with drought conditions in the western high plains and the southwestern United States. One of the exceptions, you can go back to the 30s and whatnot. We had other elements going on at that particular time. But if you go back here to what we obviously had around late 2010 through 2013, you can see a big blue spike there. Back to around the turn into 2000s, early 2000s. Then you go back to the 70s, you go back to the 50s, and then some really nasty and perpetual droughts from about 1860 off and on through about 1900. After we got past 1900, you see right there, we flipped over into a positive phase, and the rain actually started to come. So this is not a coincidence when this happens. When the Pacific is cool, it usually favors more infrequent La Nina position, more La Nina patterns, and that's when we suffer from drought a little bit more. So what you're looking at with the Pacific Ocean, we also have the Atlantic Ocean that has a similar phase. So if we go to the next slide, you can see the AMO, or the Atlantic Multi-Decadal Oscillation, all the way back to 1860. Those flips are a little less frequent. So the AMO has a little longer life cycle in its particular phase. And here recently, we've been in a positive AMO since about 1995. There have been a little cool blips here and there, but nothing sustained like what we saw from, say, 1965 through about 1995. Those periods last on the order of about, say, 30 years or so. And we've been in an AMO positive situation now for about 25 years. So we could possibly see a full-on flip here within about the next 5 years or so, if history has anything to say about that. Now, how does that tie together? And some of you know this already, but for those of you that may not, you might be scratching your head saying, well, how does the different phases of the PDO and AMO impact us around here? Well, the next graphic kind of puts that down for you to show you kind of how we are. Where we sit right now is in the lower right. We are PDO negative and we are AMO positive. And where you're seeing the red there on the map, that's where drought frequency is enhanced when the oceans are stacked that way. So it's no surprise that a large part of Texas was suffering from drought, especially the west side of Texas, Colorado, New Mexico, Arizona, Utah, southern Nevada, and out into California having real problems. And if you live here in eastern Colorado or in the western high plains, you're looking at that map right there. And you might say, well, I'm going to be dealing with drought about 75% of the time. And you're absolutely right. But it shouldn't come as any surprise because you're farming and ranching in a desert anyway. So you have to, it takes a special set of circumstances to actually put us in a net positive in terms of moisture. And if you want to know when that occurred, you have to go back to the 90s to see a long-term pattern that supported above average moisture in the western high plains. And that's the map that you see there in the upper left-hand portion. When you have the PDO is positive and the AMO is negative, we haven't seen something like that sustain itself for a several year period since the 90s. Now, we had little blips here and there back in late 14, 15, 16, when the Pacific was in a very positive state, we dealt with that. But since then, we've kind of shut that off just a little bit. But this is not a perfect roadmap, mind you, but it gives you a very good idea where we should sit for future planning when the oceans are stacked in a particular way. If you have more questions on that, I'll have all my contact information at the end. But I hope this map makes sense, because if you are a farmer or a rancher in the western high plains, you need to know about these phases in terms of how you manage your risk, not only with your land, but your cattle, your equipment inventory, your bank accounts, so on and so forth. So let's go to the next slide, which is going to start to forecast here for you in terms of model data. This first map is the North American Multi-Model Ensemble. This came out about 10 days ago. We're seeing the yellows to the reds. That's where the model is forecasting drier than average conditions, where your blues and the greens, that's where it's forecasting wetter than average conditions. And this is for the month of March. And you can see that it is fairly pessimistic. But if you remember that map that we were situated in, where the PDO was negative and the AMO was positive, you can see right there where it's favoring those drier than average conditions across most of Texas, New Mexico, Colorado, and back to the west across Southern California, with the weather than average conditions prevailing up in the Pacific Northwest and parts of the Northern Rockies. Let's go to April. We're not going to see a whole lot of change here. In fact, if anything, the drier than average signal strengthens and pushes a little bit farther to the north. And this owes to the La Nina episode typically being the driest overall for the western high plains during the spring. So La Nina is rarely kind to us during the spring months. And at least as far as this particular model is concerned, it doesn't look like that is going to change a whole lot. Let's go to the next slide. This will be for the month of May. Same story. So you know as well as I do, if we are in a net deficit when it comes to moisture during the months of March, April, and May, that really puts us behind the 8 ball as we head into summertime. And right now, that's what we're looking at for those 3 months. Now, if we go into June, the drought signal or the dry signal relaxes somewhat, but it's still somewhat anchored, which makes sense because if you are drying things out even further from where they are right now, that drought gets a foothold, and it is a terrible positive feedback mechanism in the atmosphere. Drought begets drought. So the drier the ground is, the faster it heats up. The faster it heats up, the drier it gets. The faster it heats up, it stirs up the wind in the atmosphere. The wind dries it out. You know the drill. So would this drought just immediately go away? No, it's going to take some time or a full-on weather pattern shift to really make some progress with where we are right now. If we go to July, there are some signs that it would relax further, but the dry signal pushes farther north. You see the green there that's coming out of Mexico through Arizona and western New Mexico on up into southwest Colorado. That's the hint of the monsoon season developing. Well, the past two monsoon seasons have failed entirely. So to bank on a monsoon season, to yank us out of a drought, yeah, you can do that. But boy, it really narrows the time frame in the calendar year to where we can reap the benefits of that moisture. If we go to the next slide, which I think takes us into August, you don't see really a tip one way or another. And I'll always preface this, statistically, the farther you go out in time, your forecast is largely going to be more inaccurate. So you have to take some of these later months a little bit with a grain of salt right here, that we have a little bit of time to watch this. But if you buy this particular model, there are some signs that we might actually have a little bit of a monsoon season around here that can help things out just a little bit. But the spring, at least the way this model suggests it, is looking pretty bleak right now. Let's go to the next slide. This particular model is the European seasonal model precipitation forecast. So it's the same scale where you're seeing the browns drier than average, greens and blues wetter than average. And it looks, for the month of March, very similar to what the NMME showed us, where the dry signal was pretty stout there in the western and southern plains into the southwestern United States, with the more active part of the storm track favoring areas from the Pacific Northwest, northern plains, and into the upper part of the Midwest, or at least the Corn Belt. Let's go to April. The month of April, again, shows a very stout dry signal across most of Colorado and the western high plains, the more active part of the storm track situated farther north. So that's two models right there that are both painting a pretty dry scenario for both March and April. And historically speaking, during La Nina episodes, the spring is drier than average. So the models seem to be picking up on that as well. Let's go to May. Not a whole lot of help there for the month of May. I'm not really sure what the green, the wetter than average conditions are really all about down in the Texas Panhandle, kind of wedged in between that dryness right there. So I kind of have to take that with a little bit of grain of salt. But farther north, the dry signal is as robust as it was both in April and in March. So again, that's two of the more mainstream models that we use in terms of long range forecasting that are latching onto this dry signal persisting for a while. Let's go to June. Month of June, same story. The dry signal relaxes a little bit. You can see some of that green and blue down in Mexico coming up through western New Mexico and eastern Arizona, a sign of maybe the monsoon season trying to get going right there. But in terms of, as we progress through time here, that dry signal not only develops on top of us, but it also spreads farther north. If we go to the month of July, you see kind of a similar setup there where that dry signal is still on top of us. Now, if you look at western Colorado back down into western New Mexico and Arizona and into northern Mexico, that's the monsoon. Well, a lot of times it depends on exactly where that high pressure is going to set up to determine how we get that monsoon flow out of the south and southwest. If it sets up a little bit too close to us, it diverts that monsoon moisture farther west, and that keeps the eastern half of the state dry. If you were to believe that, this particular model suggests that that is a real possibility with that. Let's go to one more. I think we go into August with this. Yeah, that's when we start to relent just a little bit, where we have wetter than average conditions down there to our southwest, which would be a tremendous blessing if we could get a monsoon season that would at least help eradicate some of the drought that has such a strong regional footprint, especially back to our west and to our southwest. Let's go to the next slide, which I think basically is my contact information and also my Twitter handle right there. Folks, and I want to qualify this as saying, I know that looks bleak at best, but this is something that I've been yapping about now for the better part of the past 10 months to a year. So if you follow what I've been talking about, you know that this really isn't a huge surprise where we sit. Now, I will say this, that this La Nina, because the North Pacific isn't as cold as it typically is with a La Nina, could that mean something different if we head through the spring? Could that be at least a chance that this spring the La Nina could behave differently and grace us with better moisture? I would have to say that if that were to be the case, areas along the Palmer Divide and I-70 and farther north probably stand a better opportunity of reaping those benefits than areas farther south. And that's just simply how it behaves. You know that already. You drop south of the Palmer Divide or south of I-70, you know that it's typically drier than areas farther north. So historically speaking, if La Nina were to at least invigorate the storm track a little bit and help us out a little bit, I think those areas would probably stand the best chance to see it. Disclaimer that I always throw out there, all of this could be wrong. It is. It's the future. Future's a hard business. Otherwise, all of you guys would have be heavily invested in Bitcoin when it was at about $1,000 and it topped out today at $51,000. So the future's a hard business, especially when it comes to weather. If nothing else, something that's been encouraging for some of us is that we have seen at least a few storms come through, but they've largely underperformed and they have not erased the drought. The liquid content, as far as the snow is concerned, has been fairly poor. And you know as well as anybody, when we get into March and April, we need that moisture and we need that wetter snow. And right now, I think the deck is stacked against us, at least the way I see it. So I hope that makes some sense. And I hope that kind of ties together some of the things that I look at all the time when I put this information out there, that it's just not going off half-cocked and just simply looking at something and say, yeah, it's going to be dry. And then you have to base your decisions around that. I've talked to my family about this at length, off and on, for the past several years. And I told them point blank, if you're not using weather, especially long-range weather, forecasting as part of your risk management toolbox, then you're missing the boat. And I will also qualify that if you are depending on weather apps on your phone to make risk management decisions for your business, you're also missing the boat. And I'd be more than happy to help you out with something like that. So if you have questions after the presentation, feel free to hit me up on my email or hit me up on Twitter. Those of you that have done so know that I'll get back to you very quickly and we can discuss that. So if you have questions, Jessica, yeah, I think you just chimed in right there. If you have any questions, we can put them in chat. I can read those too, Jess, if you want me to.
Yes, please do.
Yeah, so Travis just popped in and said, do you see it warm and dry or cold and dry this spring? I think we have a little bit more cold weather to go here during the back part of February. The way things have kind of progressed with this latest Arctic surge coming through, that kind of broke things open a little bit to allow some of the colder than average air to come south. I would say the areas that are dry, when we start to see that sun angle get higher, it warms up the ground more. And I would say that it would be on the warmer and drier side of things. I would also say that when you have a La Nina in place and you are dealing with drought, there is always a good chance for a late season surge of cold to come down from the north. And we have seen stuff like that off and on for the past few years. And with the Arctic air that came through this last week, I know a lot of folks looking at the winter wheat out there going, what are we going to have to deal with? Well, I know from just past experience, there's been a lot of times when that winter wheat in February looked like it didn't stand a chance, and it did okay if it caught some timely moisture. Right now, I think the chances of that are lesser than average that they would do that, and also those late season cold fronts to come down can obviously do some harm too. But to make a short answer long, Travis, that's kind of what I'm thinking right now. Anybody else have any questions?
Other questions for Brian?
I think I saw one earlier from Brian Elmer. He posted one on there around, it was around 30 minutes ago when we were just getting started. And his question was, how much moisture is it going to take to pull us out of this drought? It's going to take a lot, to be honest, but I'm not necessarily concerned about the amount of moisture with that versus the frequency. If we could get storms coming through that would at least produce moisture frequently, we don't need a ton of snow to break this drought. We just need to break the pattern to where we can get stuff to come through here more frequently. That would at least be a very good start. So the mountain locations are going to have, especially those southwest mountains, are going to have some real problems too. And I know that has irrigation implications along the Arkansas River. Troy has a question. So what's the weather outlook for the Corn Belt for this new crop? Well, those maps that I showed you right there, Troy, pretty much tell the story. There are some indications that while the early season part in the Corn Belt would probably be wetter and colder than average, I am a little bit concerned that if we see this La Nina go away, that they may dry out later. And we still have some work to do on that in terms of the forecast. But some of the stuff that I saw just the other day suggests that while they may have plenty of moisture, at least early on, they might have to worry about the back half of their corn season. So we'll have to track that closely, Troy. Anybody else?
Brian, thank you.
You got it, Bill.
Appreciate your time and some information. I think we still have your contact information up here on the screen. If you don't happen to catch it before we close out today, I'm sure that Jessica or Kelly can get it to you. So if there are no other questions, I would like to thank you, Brian. I'd like to thank our other panelists, Ethan, Doug, and Troy. Will, thank you for moderating, and thank you to your support group, Kelsey Pope, Brady Buck, and Glenn Benjamin. Thank you to our sponsors, Ag Pro, Ag Risk Advisors, Alltech, Landco, and Flagler Cooperative. And as I mentioned earlier, if you have any thoughts or comments about the quality of this presentation, aside from the technology, just kind of the program content, something that you think we maybe should have had or that you really liked, please let us know. From time to time, check our website. Also, our CLA Weekly electronic newsletter for information on upcoming events. And one more time, this was recorded today, in case you'd like to go back and listen to pieces and parts of it. And most of all, thank you for all who joined us today. We appreciate your attendance and your participation. And with that, I think we will stand adjourned.